When you're 16, the world is supposed to be opening up. But for my sister and me, it was slamming shut, one dead-bolted door at a time. This is the story of how we were kicked out with nothing, and how we bought a rusted-out, forgotten warehouse for $7. What we found inside wasn't just our future, it was the truth about our past. And if you've ever felt like the world has thrown you away, stick around. You might see a piece of your own story in ours. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because we're all just trying to find a place to call home. And sometimes, you have to build it out of the scraps you're left with. The sound I remember most is the click of the lock. Not a loud, angry slam, but a quiet, final little noise. A sound that said, "This is over." It was 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in October, and the air had that brittle, cold edge that promised an early winter. My sister Maya stood next to me on the cracked concrete of the porch, holding a single, overstuffed duffel bag. I had a backpack that felt both too heavy and completely empty. Inside were 2 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I'd read a dozen times, and my phone, its screen a spiderweb of cracks. We were 16 and 17, and we were homeless. Our stepfather, a man named Rick who had married our mom 2 years after our dad left, stood on the other side of the glass. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He just looked tired, like we were a piece of furniture he'd finally managed to haul to the curb. "Your mom's gone," he'd said, not unkindly, but with the flat finality of a weather report. "This was her house. It's not yours." It had been a week since the funeral, a week of sleeping in our childhood beds, surrounded by the floral wallpaper our mom had picked out, feeling like ghosts in our own lives. We knew this was coming. We just didn't think it would be so quiet, so simple. Maya, ever the practical one, had already packed our bags. She'd seen the way Rick stopped making eye contact, the way he started stacking empty boxes in the garage. While I was still trying to process the gaping hole our mother's short, brutal illness had left in the world, Maya was preparing for the aftershock. She was 17, but she had the eyes of a 40-year-old who'd seen too many deals go bad. "Where do we go?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat, turning into a puff of white in the cold air. She didn't look at me. She was staring at the house, our house, memorizing it. "Forward," she said, her voice tight. "Just forward." We walked. We didn't know where else to go. We walked past familiar houses, past kids riding their bikes, past the smell of someone's laundry. Every normal sight felt like a personal insult. The world was just continuing on, oblivious. We ended up at the public library, not because we wanted to read, but because it was warm and you didn't have to pay to sit there. We found a small table in the back, between nonfiction and periodicals, and dropped our bags. The silence was a relief. It was a space to think, or to not think. I chose the latter. I stared at the wood grain of the table, tracing the patterns with my eyes, trying to make my mind as blank as possible. Maya, however, was already in motion. She pulled out her phone and a small, crumpled notebook. She was scrolling through websites for youth shelters, for part-time jobs, for rooms to rent that we had no hope of affording. She was building a lifeboat while I was still treading water, convinced the ocean floor was about to swallow me whole. That's when the email arrived. It wasn't on my phone, but on hers. The subject line was just a name, Leo and Maya Vance. It was from a law firm, one of those old ones with 3 last names strung together. My first thought was that it was Rick, some official notice telling us to never come back. My stomach clenched. Maya read it, her expression unreadable. She read it again, then slid the phone across the table to me. "Read this." The email was brief. It was from a lawyer named Arthur Pinter. It said he was the executor of the estate of our maternal grandfather, Thomas Vance. It requested our presence at his office to discuss an inheritance. It was formal, cold, and utterly bizarre. "Grandpa Thomas?" I said, the name feeling foreign in my mouth. We hadn't seen him since I was 5 years old. He'd been a ghost, a half-remembered story our mom would sometimes tell. A man who smelled of sawdust and coffee, who had calloused hands but a soft voice. Then, one day, he was gone. Mom always said he'd moved away, that he was a wanderer. The subtext was always clear. He'd left. He'd abandoned us. And now, a decade later, he was a dead man with an estate and a lawyer. "It's a scam," I said. "Maybe," Maya said, but she was already typing the law firm's name into a search engine. It was real. A brick building downtown with a respectable-looking website. "Or maybe," she said slowly, looking up at me, "it's our only option." The next morning, we took a bus to the address in the email. The lawyer's office was in one of those old, grand buildings that smelled of floor polish and old paper. The kind of place that made you feel poor just by walking into it. We sat in plush leather chairs that squeaked every time we moved, feeling like two stray dogs who'd wandered into a museum. Arthur Pinter was a man who seemed to be made of tweed and gentle disappointment. He was old, with kind, watery eyes behind thick glasses. He didn't seem surprised to see two teenagers with duffel bags. He gestured for us to sit. "Leo, Maya, I am very sorry for your loss, for both of your losses." His voice was calm and steady. "I knew your mother when she was a little girl, and I knew your grandfather for 30 years. He was a good man, a complicated man, but a good one." We just nodded. We didn't know what to say. He slid a thick manila folder across the polished expanse of his desk. "Thomas passed away 2 months ago. He didn't have much, not in the traditional sense. No money in the bank to speak of, no investments." My heart sank. So this was it, a dead end, a cruel joke. "But he did have one asset," Mr. Pinter continued, pulling a document from the folder. It was a property deed. He owned a piece of land out in the old industrial sector by the rail yards. It has a structure on it, a warehouse. A warehouse? I pictured a collapsing pile of bricks. "He wanted you to have it," the lawyer said. "Both of you. His will is very clear. It is your property, free and clear, with one small exception." He paused, and the weight of that pause filled the room. He fell behind on the property taxes the last 2 years, when his health declined. The city has placed a lien on it. The total amount outstanding is significant. Just over $9,000. $9,000. He might as well have said 9 million. We had a combined total of $84 between us, saved from birthday cards and a summer job I'd had for 3 weeks. "We don't have that kind of money," Maya said, her voice flat. "I know," Mr. Pinter said softly. "Thomas knew you wouldn't. Which brings us to the second part of this." He reached into the folder again and pulled out a key. A single, large, old-fashioned iron key. It was heavy and ornate, like something from a fantasy novel. "This is for a locker at the bus station downtown. He rented it under my name a week before he passed. He left instructions that you were to be given this key only after you had legally taken possession of the warehouse." "How do we do that if we can't pay the taxes?" I asked. "The deed transfer is a separate matter from the lien. The property is yours. The debt that comes with it is also yours. To finalize the transfer of ownership, according to your grandfather's will, you must pay the processing fee to his estate. He was very, very specific about the amount. He looked down at the paper. $7. $7. The number was so absurd, so specific, it felt like a secret code. He wanted it to be something you could afford, Mr. Pinter explained. He wanted to make sure that no matter what, you could claim it, that it could be yours. Maya looked at me, and for the first time in days, I saw something other than exhaustion in her eyes. It was a flicker of something. Not hope exactly, more like grim determination. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her worn wallet, and counted out 5 crumpled $1 bills and a handful of quarters. I added 2 more dollars from my own pocket. We pushed the small pile of money across the desk. $7. Mr. Pinter gravely accepted the money, wrote out a receipt, and had us sign the transfer documents. Just like that, we owned a warehouse we'd never seen, saddled with a debt we could never pay, with our only clue to solving the puzzle being a heavy iron key. We walked out of that office into the cold afternoon, no longer just homeless. We were property owners. It was the most terrifying and ridiculous thought I'd ever had. We didn't talk on the bus ride to the downtown terminal. There was nothing to say. The reality of our situation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. We were chasing a ghost's last-ditch effort, a plan that seemed half-formed and desperate. What could possibly be in a bus station locker that would solve a $9,000 problem? The bus station was a chaotic swirl of noise and people. It smelled of diesel fumes and stale popcorn. We found the bank of lockers in a poorly lit hallway. B27. The iron key felt cold in my hand. It slid into the lock with a satisfying, heavy clunk. I turned it, the mechanism inside groaning in protest, and pulled the small metal door open. Inside, there was a single object. It was a metal footlocker, the old army green kind. It wasn't large, but it was dense. It took both of us to lift it out. It was locked with a simple padlock. Of course it was. Nothing could be easy. "Now what?" I asked, staring at the padlock as if my gaze could melt it. Maya didn't answer. She was already walking toward the station's exit. "Come on." She led me to a pawn shop a few blocks away. It was a sad, cluttered place filled with other people's discarded hopes. Maya walked to the counter, pulled a 20 from our dwindling cash supply, and bought a pair of bolt cutters. No questions asked. We found a secluded spot in a small, forgotten park, a patch of brown grass between 2 buildings. We set the footlocker down. The clicking sound of Maya working the bolt cutters was loud in the quiet afternoon. With a final, sharp snap, the lock fell away. My heart was pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. Either this box held an answer, or it was the end of the line. Maya lifted the lid. I leaned over, peering inside. The first thing I saw was money. Not a neat stack, but a thick, messy roll of bills held together with a rubber band. Hundreds. It was more cash than I had ever seen in my life. Beneath it was a stack of yellowed envelopes, tied together with a piece of twine, and under those, a handful of old, faded photographs. Maya reached in and carefully lifted out the roll of cash. She sat on the cold ground, the footlocker between us, and began to count. Her fingers moved methodically, her face a mask of concentration. I watched, barely breathing. She counted it once, then a second time. When she was done, she looked up at me. $9,500, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Exactly what we need for the taxes, plus 500. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. It was real. He'd left it for us. He hadn't abandoned us after all. But the money was only part of the story. The real answers, I knew, were in the letters. I reached into the box and lifted out the bundle. The top envelope was addressed in a shaky, spidery script. It just said, "For my grandchildren." We had the money, we had the deed, and now we had his words. Sitting in that grubby little park, with the city roaring around us, we began to read. And the world we thought we knew began to fall away, replaced by a story of sacrifice, of regret, and of a love so fierce it had reached across a decade of silence to find us when we needed it most. The warehouse wasn't just a building, it was a promise, and we were about to find out how much it would cost to keep it. The journey to the warehouse was like a pilgrimage to a forgotten land. The next morning, after a restless night in a cheap motel paid for with $100 bill that felt like stage money, we paid the back taxes. The woman at the city revenue office didn't even blink. She just stamped our paperwork with a heavy finality, and the $9,000 monster that had been breathing down our necks was gone. We were left with $493, the deed to a building we'd never seen, and a stack of letters from a dead man. The address was in the Kielsen Industrial District, a part of the city people only talked about in the past tense. It was where the factories used to be, before they were shuttered and shipped overseas. The bus route that went there was old and infrequent. We were the only two passengers who stayed on past the downtown stops. The city grew sparser, the buildings lower and wider. We passed scrapyards, fenced-off lots filled with weeds, and the occasional lonely-looking diner. Finally, the bus driver called out our stop, a rusty pole with a faded sign on a cracked sidewalk. We stepped off the bus into a landscape of gray. The sky was a single, unbroken sheet of cloud. The air smelled of damp concrete and rust. And across the street, there it was. It wasn't a building so much as a monument to decay. It was enormous, a long, wide structure of corrugated metal, its surface a patchwork of faded paint and creeping orange-brown rust. The roof sagged in the middle, giving it the look of a weary beast. Every window was either boarded up or broken, dark, vacant eyes staring out at nothing. A chain-link fence, topped with concertina wire, surrounded the property, but it was bent and trampled in several places. The gate was held shut by a thick, rusted chain and a heavy-duty padlock. "This is it?" I said, the words feeling small in the vast, quiet space. "This is our home?" Maya didn't say anything. She just walked toward the gate, her steps sure and steady. She pulled the key to the padlock from her pocket. Mr. Pinter had given it to us, along with the deed. It looked just as old and stubborn as the lock. For a moment, I was sure it wouldn't work. But it slid in, turned with a groan, and the lock sprang open. The chain fell to the ground with a heavy clang that echoed in the silence. We pushed the gate open. It screamed in protest, scraping a long, curved line in the gravel driveway. We were standing on our own property. The thought was dizzying. The front of the warehouse had a single, regular-sized door set into a much larger, roll-up garage door that looked like it hadn't moved in 50 years. The small door was steel, painted a blue that had mostly flaked away. It had another lock. Maya tried the same key, but it didn't fit. She pulled out a ring of smaller, more modern-looking keys from her pocket, also from Mr. Pinter. The third one she tried clicked. She paused, her hand on the knob. She looked at me. "Ready?" I wasn't. I was terrified. But I nodded. She pushed the door open. It swung inward into darkness. A wave of cold, stale air washed over us, a smell of dust, dampness, and something else, something metallic and old, like forgotten machinery. It was the smell of time itself. We stepped inside, and for a moment we were blind. The only light came from the doorway behind us, and a few grimy shafts filtering down from high, dirty skylights far above. As our eyes adjusted, the sheer scale of the place hit me. It was cavernous. The ceiling was a complex web of steel trusses and girders, lost in the gloom 40 feet above our heads. The concrete floor stretched out before us, a vast, empty plain littered with debris. Pigeons cooed and fluttered in the high rafters, their movements sending down little showers of dust. It was an empty cathedral of industry. Along one wall, old workbenches were covered in a thick blanket of grime. In the center of the floor, the ghostly outlines of where heavy machines once sat were still visible. It was cold, colder than it was outside, the kind of deep, penetrating cold that concrete holds onto. "Well," Maya said, her voice sounding small in the immense space. "It's big." That was her version of humor, a dry, understated observation in the face of overwhelming reality. A tiny pressure release. We started to explore, our footsteps echoing unnervingly. We walked the perimeter, our hands tracing lines in the thick dust on the walls. We found a small, glassed-in office built into one corner, its windows opaque with filth. The door was unlocked. Inside, a metal desk and a chair sat waiting, as if the last person to work here had just stepped out for a moment, decades ago. A calendar on the wall was turned to August 1998. This was where we decided to open the letters. It felt right, to be in the heart of his strange inheritance, surrounded by the evidence of his final act. We sat on the dusty floor of the office, the weak light from the doorway painting a long rectangle on the concrete. Maya carefully untied the twine, and I took the first envelope. His handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. "My dearest grandchildren," it began. "If you are reading this, then it means two things. First, that I am gone, and second, that your mother is too. I am so sorry. I am sorry for that, and I am sorry for everything else. I know you must have questions. You must hate me. I understand. I hope by the time you finish these letters, you might not hate me quite so much." He went on to explain. He hadn't been a wanderer. He'd been a runner. He owned a small construction business, a successful one. He'd built things. But he'd made a bad deal, partnered with the wrong people on a big project. People with connections to organized crime. When the project went bad, they came after him for the money. They threatened him. More than that, they threatened his daughter, our mom. "They were not the kind of men you say no to," he wrote. "They would have hurt her. They would have hurt you. I had two choices: stay and watch my family get destroyed, or disappear and take the trouble with me. It wasn't a choice at all. I sold my company for cash, paid them what I could, and ran. I told your mother I was leaving for a job out west. It was a lie, but it was a lie to protect her. I thought if they believed I was gone for good, they would leave her alone. And they did." He'd spent the next 10 years living under a different name, working odd jobs, always looking over his shoulder. He sent our mom money when he could, anonymously, through a series of complicated channels. He never told her the truth because he was afraid it would put her back in danger. "The silence was the hardest part," the letter continued. "Knowing you two were growing up, knowing I was missing it all. I saw pictures of you sometimes. A friend would send them. You, Leo, with that serious little frown. And you, Maya, with your mother's stubborn chin. Every day I wanted to call. Every day I told myself no. It was the price I had to pay to keep you safe. I had to stop reading. My eyes were burning. I looked over at Maya. A single tear was tracing a clean path through the dust on her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. All those years, we'd thought we were abandoned. We'd built our identities around that fact, around the idea of a grandfather who didn't want us. And it was all a lie. It was a story about protection, not abandonment. The next letter explained the warehouse. About 5 years ago, I knew I was getting older. I knew I wouldn't be able to keep running forever. I had a little money saved up, clean money from legitimate jobs. I wanted to buy something for you, a safety net, something that couldn't be easily taken away. So I bought this piece of land. Nobody wanted it. The city had forgotten about it. It was perfect. It was a place that could wait. I put the deed in a trust managed by Arthur, the only person I trusted. I paid the taxes every year, right up until I got sick. The money in the box. It was everything I had left. I saved it for the taxes, for you. I hoped it would be enough. It was enough. It had been exactly enough. The precision of it was breathtaking. The final letter was shorter, and the handwriting was even shakier. It was written near the end. There is one more thing you need to know. A development company, a big one called Apex Global, has been trying to buy this land for years. They know the city plans to redevelop the rail lines eventually, and this property will become valuable. They've been sending lowball offers to Arthur for years, trying to get it for pennies on the dollar. They are persistent. They will come for you. They will offer you what sounds like a lot of money. It will be tempting to sell, to take the cash and start over somewhere new. I won't tell you what to do. It's your life. But this place, this is the last piece of our family. It's the only thing I have to give you, a piece of the earth that belongs to you. What you build on it is your decision. He signed it simply, "All my love, Grandpa Thomas." We sat there in the dusty, cold office for a long time, the letters spread out on the floor around us. The air was thick with his words, with his sacrifice. The whole narrative of my life had been rewritten in the space of an hour. The emptiness I'd felt, the quiet anger at the grandfather who'd left, was replaced by a profound, aching grief for the man we'd never known and the life he'd been forced to live. He hadn't left us. He had been watching over us from a distance all along. This warehouse, this cold, empty, rusting shell, wasn't a burden. It was a fortress. It was the final act of a man who had given up everything to protect his family. Suddenly, a loud noise from outside shattered the silence. A car door slamming. Then another. We looked at each other, eyes wide with alarm. I crept to the office door and peered out through the main warehouse space, toward the front entrance we'd left slightly ajar. 2 men in expensive-looking suits were walking through the open gate. They moved with an easy confidence, like they owned the place. One of them was talking on his phone. They stopped in the gravel driveway, looking the warehouse up and down. They hadn't seen us yet. "Yeah, it's a wreck," the man on the phone said. "But the footprint is perfect. We can get the zoning changed. Just tell them the offer stands. 100,000. The old man's dead. His heirs are a couple of kids. They'll bite. They'd be stupid not to." $100,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering and unreal. $100,000 could solve every problem we had. It could buy us an apartment, a car, a new life. It was the easy way out. the sensible path. The man hung up and said something to his colleague. They both laughed. They looked at the warehouse not as a building, but as a temporary obstacle on a balance sheet. I looked back at Maya. Her face was pale, but her eyes were on fire. The grief and confusion had been burned away, replaced by a cold, hard anger. She was staring past me, at the men outside, at the building around us. I could see the choice being made, not in words, but in the set of her jaw. Grandpa Thomas had said, "What we built on it was our decision." I was starting to realize he wasn't just talking about a building. He was talking about a life. If you've ever been faced with a choice that felt like it would define the rest of your life, I want you to let me know in the comments. That moment when you have to decide between the easy road and the right one. Because that's where we were. Standing in the cold, in the dark, with a ghost's legacy in our hands and the wolves at the door. And we were about to make a choice that would change everything. Stay with me, because the fight was just beginning. The two men from Apex Global didn't stay long. They did a slow walk around the fence line, pointing, making notes on a tablet, their expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel. They never tried the door. They acted as if the property was already theirs, and this was just a final inspection before demolition. Their arrogance was a tangible thing. It made the cold air in the warehouse feel even colder. When they finally drove away in their sleek black sedan, the silence they left behind was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was charged with a question. $100,000. Maya and I didn't speak for a long time. We just sat in the growing dark of the office, the roll of our remaining cash and our grandfather's letters between us, like a map to two different futures. The money was a ticket out, a clean break, an escape from the rust and the cold and the responsibility. The letters were an anchor, a story of sacrifice that demanded to be honored. "We could be gone by tomorrow," I said, finally giving voice to the thought that was hanging between us. "We could get a nice apartment, finish school, be normal." The word normal sounded like a foreign delicacy. Maya picked up the last letter, the one with the shaky handwriting. She ran her thumb over his signature. "He spent 10 years alone, Leo, working cash jobs, living in cheap rooms, just so we could be safe. He bought this place with everything he had left, not so we could flip it like some house on a reality show. He bought it so we would have something that nobody could take away from us." $100,000 is a lot of money, I argued, though my heart wasn't in it. I was testing her, testing myself. "Is it?" she shot back, her eyes flashing. "Is it more than this? More than what he did?" Those men out there, they look at this place and see a number on a spreadsheet. He looked at it and saw a future for us. Selling it to them feels like we'd be selling him, selling his story for cash. She was right. Taking their money would be the final erasure of Thomas Vance. It would be validating their belief that everything and everyone has a price. Our grandfather had spent his life running from men like that. We couldn't, in the end, join them. The decision settled over us, not with a crash, but with a quiet, solemn click, like a key turning in a lock. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "Okay," I said, the word a simple exhale. "So we stay." "We stay," she confirmed, a small, fierce smile touching her lips. "We fight." That night, we didn't go back to a motel. We stayed in the warehouse. Our warehouse. We dragged one of the old, heavy workbenches into the office, wiped it down with the sleeves of our jackets, and laid out our sleeping bags. We ate stale granola bars for dinner, the crunching sound echoing in the vast emptiness. We had no power, no heat, no water. But for the first time in what felt like forever, we weren't adrift. We were anchored to something. Lying there in the pitch black, listening to the wind whistle through the broken panes high above, I felt a strange sense of peace. The building seemed to breathe around us, a sleeping giant. It was our protector, our legacy, our home. The next morning, the reality of our choice hit us with the force of the icy wind blowing through the main door. We had a fortress, but it was a fortress in ruins. We had less than $500 to our name. Winter was coming, and we were two teenagers with no skills, no plan, and no idea what we were doing. Maya, as always, was the one who started with a list. She found a piece of cardboard and a nub of a pencil on the office desk and started writing. 1. Secure the perimeter. 2. Water. 3. Power. 4. Food. 5. Income. It looked so simple on the cardboard. It felt impossible in practice. We started with the perimeter. We spent the entire day walking the fence line, using pliers from a rusty toolbox we'd found to twist the bent sections of chain link back together. We reinforced the gate with heavy wire. We boarded up the most accessible broken windows on the ground floor using scrap lumber we found stacked in a corner. It was brutal, physical work. My hands were raw and bleeding by noon. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest. But with every nail we hammered, with every wire we twisted, the place felt a little more like ours. We were claiming it, inch by painful inch. That afternoon, we made our first foray into the small, struggling town that bordered the industrial district. It was a place of closed storefronts and quiet streets. We found a hardware store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The man behind the counter was old, with a deeply lined face and hands stained with what looked like a lifetime of grease and paint. His name tag read Sal. He watched us with shrewd, curious eyes as we picked out a heavy-duty flashlight, work gloves, and a large plastic container to hold water. "You the kids who took over the old Vance place?" he asked, his voice a low grumble. We looked at each other, surprised. "News travels fast," Maya said. Sal grunted. "This town ain't that big. Knew your granddad, not well, but I knew him. He'd come in here sometimes, years back. Quiet fella, always paid cash." He rang up our items. "Heard Apex is sniffing around out there." "They are," I said. He looked at us, a long, appraising look. "Well, good luck to you. They don't give up easy." He pushed a small, sealed bucket across the counter toward us. "On the house. It's industrial hand cleaner. You're gonna need it." It was a small gesture, but it felt enormous. It was the first crack of light in our isolation, the first hint that we weren't entirely alone in this fight. The next few weeks were a blur of survival. We filled our water container at a public tap in the park. We bought food from a discount grocery store, canned beans, bread, peanut butter. We discovered that a single power outlet in the office was, miraculously, still live. We plugged in a single lamp with a bare bulb, and its small circle of light became the center of our universe. We spent our evenings huddled in that little office, reading our grandfather's letters over and over, drawing strength from his words. The warehouse itself began to reveal its secrets. Tucked away in corners and under tarps, we found remnants of its past life. There were old tools, stacks of hardwood, forgotten barrels of nails and screws. It was a treasure trove of raw materials. One afternoon, while clearing out a small storage room, I kicked a loose floorboard. Curious, I pried it up. And there, in the dark space beneath, was another box. This one wasn't locked. It was full of documents, blueprints for the warehouse, old permits, and most importantly, journals. They were our grandfather's. Not letters this time, but daily logs from the year he bought the place. He'd spent months here, all alone, cleaning it, reinforcing the roof, mapping out the electrical systems. He'd been preparing it for us, even then. The journals were a practical guide. He'd noted which water lines were viable, which parts of the roof needed patching most urgently, which electrical breakers controlled which sections of the massive building. He'd left us a user's manual for our own survival. It felt like he was right there with us, guiding our hands. Using his notes, we managed to get the water running to a single utility sink in a grimy bathroom. The first time that faucet sputtered to life, spewing rusty water that slowly, miraculously ran clear, we whooped and cheered, our voices echoing through the empty space. It felt like we had discovered fire. But our money was dwindling fast. We knew we needed a source of income, and soon. The answer, it turned out, was all around us. The warehouse was filled with forgotten industrial furniture, heavy-duty workbenches, steel shelving units, old metal stools. They were covered in grime and rust, but they were incredibly well made. Maya had the idea. "People love this stuff," she said one night, pointing her flashlight at a particularly sturdy-looking steel cabinet. "Industrial chic. They pay a fortune for it in the city." We spent a week on a single piece, a long, solid maple workbench. We scrubbed it, sanded it down by hand until our arms ached, and sealed it with oil we bought from Sal. It was beautiful. The wood grain glowed under our single bare bulb. Maya took pictures of it on her phone, and using the library's free Wi-Fi, posted it for sale online. We didn't expect much, but 2 days later, a man from a trendy downtown neighborhood drove out in a pristine pickup truck. He walked into our dusty, cavernous home, looked at the workbench, and whistled. "This is the real deal," he said. He paid us $600 in cash and hauled it away. It was a turning point. We had a product. We had a business. We had a plan. We called it Vance Restoration. We started small. We'd restore one piece at a time, post it online, and use the money to buy more supplies and food. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to build a life inside those metal walls. We cleaned a small section of the warehouse, our work area, and then a slightly larger section, which became our living space. We partitioned it off with heavy tarps, creating a room within a room to hold in the heat from the 2 small electric heaters we bought. It wasn't easy. Some days the cold was so bone deep I couldn't feel my fingers. Some days the sheer scale of the work left us so exhausted we'd fall asleep in our clothes. And always, in the back of our minds, was the shadow of Apex Global. They sent letters, official and intimidating, addressed to the heirs of Thomas Vance. The first one reiterated their offer of $100,000. We ignored it. The second one offered $125,000. We ignored that one too. The third letter was different. It came from their legal department. It informed us that the property was in violation of multiple city codes: commercial zoning for a residential dwelling, safety violations, electrical code infractions. It stated that if the property was not brought up to code or vacated, they would have no choice but to report us to the city. It was a threat wrapped in polite legalese. That letter terrified me. They were right. We were squatting in our own home. We were vulnerable. This was the moment of crisis, where the sheer weight of what we were trying to do threatened to crush us. I lay awake that night, listening to the building groan, convinced that at any moment police would show up and throw us out, and we'd be back on the street, only this time with nothing. I felt that old, familiar despair creeping back in, the feeling that the world was too big and we were too small. I finally confessed my fear to Maya the next morning over our breakfast of instant oatmeal. I expected her to be scared too, but she just looked at me with that steady, unwavering gaze. "So we get it up to code," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Maya, we're not electricians. We're not plumbers. We're kids," I said, my voice cracking. "We can't do this." "We couldn't fix this place up," she said, gesturing to our small, clean living area. "We couldn't start a business. We couldn't survive the last 2 months. But we did. We'll figure it out, Leo. We always do." She picked up her grandfather's journal. "He left us the map. We just have to follow it." Her belief was so absolute, it was contagious. It didn't erase my fear, but it gave me a place to stand. It was the moment I realized that home wasn't just the building around us. It was the space between us, the trust we had built, the shared promise to never let the other one fall. That day, we made a choice. We weren't just going to survive here. We were going to build a life, a real, legal, permanent one. We took the money from our last 2 workbench sales and went to see a lawyer, not Mr. Pinter, who was a corporate lawyer, but a scrappy public interest attorney we found through a legal aid website. We laid out the whole story: the inheritance, the letters, our business, the threats from Apex. She listened patiently, taking notes. When we were done, she leaned back in her chair. "Well," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "they picked a fight with the wrong kids." She explained the law to us. There were zoning variances we could apply for. There were small business grants for youth entrepreneurs. There were historical preservation statutes that might apply to a building of that era. It was a long shot, a mountain of paperwork, but it wasn't impossible. For the first time, the system didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a toolbox we could learn to use. The decision was made. We weren't going to run. We weren't going to hide. We were going to stand our ground on the piece of earth our grandfather had left us. And we were going to build. Apex Global wanted a fight. We were going to give them one. We walked out of that lawyer's office, not as scared teenagers, but as the proud owners of Vance Restoration, ready to defend our home. The months that followed were a long, grinding war fought on 2 fronts. By day, we were laborers, covered in sawdust and paint, bringing old furniture back to life. By night, we were paralegals, hunched over our workbench turned desk under the single bare bulb, filling out forms, writing letters, and learning a whole new language of zoning laws and building codes. Our lawyer, a woman named Ms. Alvarez, was our general. She guided us through the labyrinth of city bureaucracy. We applied for a live/work zoning variance, a special designation for artists and craftspeople. We filed the initial paperwork to register our small business officially. Each form was a small victory, a brick laid in the foundation of our legitimacy. Apex Global didn't take it lying down. They escalated. A city inspector showed up, a grim-faced man with a clipboard, clearly sent by them. He walked through the warehouse, pointing out every violation. The wiring was outdated. The plumbing wasn't up to commercial code. There was no fire suppression system. The list was long and demoralizing. He gave us a notice. We had 90 days to submit a remediation plan or face condemnation proceedings. It was a body blow. The cost of bringing the entire massive structure up to code would be astronomical. We were making a few $1,000s a month from our furniture business, enough to live on and invest in supplies, but not nearly enough for a full electrical rewiring or a sprinkler system. It felt like checkmate. That night, for the first time, Maya and I had a real fight. The stress had finally cracked our united front. "Maybe they're right," I said, slumping onto a stool, the inspector's report in my hand. "Maybe this is impossible. We should have taken the money." "Don't you dare say that," Maya snapped, her voice sharp. "Don't you quit. Not now." "I'm not quitting. I'm being realistic. Look at this list, Maya. This is $1 million job." "I don't care," she said, her fists clenched. "I don't care if it's impossible. We promised. We promised him." She was pointing at the letters, which we kept on a shelf in the office. "He didn't quit when they threatened him. He didn't quit when he was alone and had nothing. He spent his last dime on this place for us. We are not going to let these suits take it away because it's hard." Her words, full of fire and grief and loyalty, cut through my despair. She was right. We had come too far to give up. We weren't just fighting for a building. We were fighting for his memory. The next day, we went back to our grandfather's journals. If he'd left us a map for survival, maybe he'd left us a map for this, too. We scoured the pages, looking for anything, any clue, and we found it. Tucked into a back pocket of the last journal was a folded, hand-drawn diagram. It wasn't a blueprint of the whole warehouse. It was a detailed plan for the small office and the section of the warehouse immediately around it. About 2,000 square feet in total. He had mapped out a plan to make that small section a self-contained, habitable unit. He'd noted which walls were non-load-bearing, where a small kitchen could be installed, how to run a new dedicated electrical sub-panel just for that area. He had anticipated this. He knew we could never afford to fix the whole place at once, so he'd given us a plan to create a small, legal, livable island in the middle of our vast, code-violating ocean. Armed with this new plan, Ms. Alvarez went back to the city. She argued that we weren't trying to occupy the entire 20,000 square foot structure. We were seeking a permit to build a small, 2-bedroom apartment and a workshop within it. We would seal it off from the rest of the warehouse, which would be classified as storage space until we could afford to renovate it. It was a brilliant strategy. It was manageable. It was affordable. The city planning department, intrigued by the unique proposal, agreed to review it. Now we just had to build it. This is where the community, the one we didn't even know we had, stepped in. Sal from the hardware store was our first recruit. We showed him our grandfather's plan. He squinted at it, then nodded slowly. "Your granddad knew his stuff," he grumbled. "This is a solid plan." He started giving us discounts on materials, real contractor-level discounts. He introduced us to a retired electrician, a friend of his named George, who was bored and looking for a project. George came by, looked at our sub-panel plan, and agreed to oversee our work for the price of coffee and donuts, ensuring it was done to code. Word started to spread through the small town. The story of the 2 kids in the old Vance warehouse, fighting off the big city developer. People started showing up. A plumber who offered to help us install the new pipes for our small kitchen and bathroom on his day off. A group of guys from the local diner who spent a Saturday helping us put up drywall. They were people like our grandfather, builders, fixers, people who understood what it meant to make something with your own hands. They didn't want our money, they just wanted to help. They saw in our fight a reflection of their own struggles against a world that was always trying to push the little guy out. Apex saw what was happening. Their offers got higher, 200,000, 300. It was meaningless to us now. It was never about the money. The day the final inspection for our new small home inside the warehouse was scheduled was the most nerve-wracking day of my life. the same grim-faced inspector returned. He walked through our small, clean, well-lit apartment. He checked the wiring George had supervised. He tested the water pressure in the pipes the plumber had helped us lay. He measured the thickness of the fire-rated drywall we had painstakingly hung and mudded. He spent an hour going over every detail. We just stood there, holding our breath. Finally, he came back to where we were waiting, his face unreadable. He made a few check marks on his clipboard. Then he took out a green sticker, signed it, and placed it on the inside of our new front door. "You're up to code," he said, and for the first time, I thought I saw a flicker of a smile on his face. "Welcome home." When he left, Maya and I just stood there, staring at the green sticker. And then we started to cry. Not sad tears, but tears of exhaustion, of relief, of overwhelming gratitude. We had done it. We had won. We had built a home, not with money, but with grit and community and the love of a grandfather we'd barely known. That green sticker was more than a permit. It was a shield. With a legally recognized residence on the property, it became infinitely harder for Apex to force a sale or claim the property was derelict. Their letters stopped. The black sedan stopped cruising past our gate. We had outlasted them. Life found a new rhythm after that. Our business grew. We bought better tools. We hired a local kid part-time to help with sanding. We turned a corner of the warehouse into a proper workshop and another into a showroom. People started coming to us, not just for the furniture, but for the story. They wanted to see the place two teenagers had brought back from the dead. We never tried to fix the whole warehouse. We didn't need to. We embraced its beautiful decay. The vast, empty spaces became part of its character. We'd host small community markets in the main bay, inviting other local artisans to sell their wares. The building that had once been a symbol of industrial collapse became a hub of creation and community. It was alive again. Looking back, I see that the warehouse was a gift far greater than land or a building. It was a crucible. It burned away our fear and our self-doubt and forged us into adults. It taught me that inheritance isn't about what you're given, but what you do with it. Our grandfather didn't leave us a solution, he left us a challenge. And in meeting that challenge, we found ourselves. The warehouse stands today, rust and all. It's a patchwork of old and new. The main structure is still a testament to a bygone era, but inside its heart is a warm, bright home, filled with the smell of sawdust and coffee, the same smells I faintly remembered from my grandfather. We built a life there, a real one that honored the sacrifices he made. We took the last piece of our family and made it a new beginning. Home isn't a place you find, it's a place you make. It's the choice to stay when it would be easier to run. It's the decision to build when you're surrounded by ruins. It's the act of taking the broken pieces you've been handed and with your own two hands, creating something that is whole, something that is yours. I wanted to share this story with you because I know so many of you are facing your own impossible situations. You're looking at the rusted, broken-down warehouse of your life and thinking, this is it. It's over. But it's not. It's the beginning. It's a foundation. What can you build on it? What secret strengths, what forgotten blueprints are hidden inside you, waiting to be discovered? Please, share your own stories in the comments below. Tell me about the time you chose to build, the time you decided to fight. I read every one, and I promise you, you are not alone. This community is a place for builders, for restorers, for people who know that the most beautiful things are often the ones we have to save. Thank you for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, because we all have a story worth telling.